Walking through a graveyard yesterday, I stepped on a broken piece of a headstone with just my birthday inscribed on it. Reddit, what's your creepiest/weirdest coincidental experience? My grandpa has always been the type of guy to love science fiction and the paranormal. One time he told me a story that has always freaked me out. Years ago, when my mother and her sisters were little, my grandpa had a Ouija board that he liked to mess around with down in their basement. One day, he asked the Ouija board questions about himself that the board could answer, i.e., where am I from? What's my address? Who is my mother? Just to see what it would say. He asked, how many daughters do I have? And it responded with 3. My grandpa said, I have 4, and the board responded with, not for long. 2 weeks later, one of his daughters died in a car crash. 6 years ago, because of my drinking, I'd been homeless for about 8 months. I'd been at a shelter for a few weeks, and one day, as I walked from the library back to the shelter for dinner, I decided I couldn't take any more. I was ready to end myself. That prior August my mother had passed away, so on the street that evening I said to her, I can't take it anymore, Mom. Help me. Back at the shelter, after dinner, us bums waited for showers and bedtime. That evening the shelter had more residents than usual, and many of them needed clean socks or underwear, etc. On this night, it wasn't scheduled, but the shelter opened the basement where they kept donated clothes. I didn't need anything, but I was bored, so I went downstairs. I browsed the racks and didn't find anything to my liking, so I headed for the stairs. That's where I found Lamut. Lamut is a toy, a little stuffed dog, and I'd had one when I was a kid. In fact, I clearly remembered my mother and I in the store, 20 plus years ago, buying him. I was in 3rd grade then. I asked a volunteer if he knew where the dog came from. He shook his head. This was, and still is, a men's homeless shelter. People were not dropping off stuffed animals for the junkies and drunks. I don't know where the dog came from, but I kept him. Still got him. Anyway, my life is much better, and different, today. I'm set to graduate with a BFA next month. Life is really, really good. Thanks, Mom. I love you. Around 6 or 7 years ago, a large portion of my neighborhood burned down in the fires that swept through Southern California. While helping my friend's family pick through the rubble of their home for anything that could be salvaged, I saw a speck of white paper in the midst of one of the more blackened areas. I picked it up and read it. The only text on this bit of paper, left over after the rest of the page had burned away, was from the ashes, new life is born. I worked at a library for a very long time, and in an effort to not lose my soul, I collected stuff I found in books. My favorite discovery was a hilarious postcard between 2 friends. I immediately thought, I'd like to meet these people. I kept it next to my computer for a few years. After a few years passes, I'm going through my papers and find a postcard from my girlfriend that I don't recognize. It takes me a few minutes to understand that I'm reading the postcard I'd put aside years earlier, between someone who was now my girlfriend and another person I'd come to know as a friend. It was probably the weirdest event in a series of events that defied probability regarding a ton of surreal linking events in our lives. Similar story. In high school in Los Angeles, I drove a friend down to Dana Point, California to look at a car on sale on Craigslist. At the house of the car owner, I shared a moment with the cute girl living next door via prolonged eye contact as she left her house. Friend bought the car. We left. 5 years later, I moved to South Orange County and take a job near Dana Point and start dating a girl I sort of worked with. When I went to her house for the first time, I stopped cold while walking up her driveway as I realized where I was. It was the house. She was the girl. She asked me what was wrong because she could almost literally see my mind exploding. I told her the story, and we shared another moment on that same lawn from 5 years before. We're getting married next July. When I was about 12, I had a terrible nightmare in which 2 planes collided in mid-air. It was extremely vivid and I woke up in a panic. My bedroom was right next to the family bathroom, and after about 30 minutes of lying in bed freaking out, I noticed the landing light come on and knew that a parent was heading to the bathroom. Now by 12, I wasn't the sort to bother my parents about nightmares anymore, but I was convinced there was going to be a plane crash, so I rushed out to my mom and told her everything. She said I was being stupid and that I should just read and try to get back to sleep. The next morning, my mom comes rushing into my room and pulls me out of bed and has my dad with her. She asks me to tell him about my nightmare, and then they both looked freaked out. They insisted that I went downstairs with them to watch the news. I thought they were pranking me or something, but when I got down, breakfast news was running a story about this. We later worked out that I'd woken up around about the time the crash itself took place. Nothing like this has happened since. A couple years back, I had a dream of my grandfather, who I was not particularly close to by any means. In my dream I saw his casket formally covered by an American flag he served in the military. He stood next to me in a room full of mourners and held my hand. He told me not to follow him out of the doors when he left. I watched him leave. When I woke up and went downstairs to get breakfast and call my father to tell him happy birthday, my older brother informed me that my grandfather had just passed away in his sleep while I also slept. When I was in 7th grade I had a serious crush on a girl. One day her mom was driving a bunch of us somewhere and everyone was talking and making jokes. I can't remember the exact conversation, but I had a moment of silence where it was my chance to make everyone laugh. I made a super lame joke that brought silence. My moment to impress was ruined. Come 10 years later. I am driving a car with the kids of family friends. In the same seat in the back sits a kid that reminds me of me, and there is a girl in the front seat he likes. The exact conversation, something about not enough of us to do something, starts progressing. I look into the rear view mirror at the kid and was thinking, don't say we will multiply. Don't say we will multiply. Seriously wish I remember exactly what the conversation was. I was going to intervene before he said it, but bam, he drops the same lame joke I did 10 years before. And it seriously had no context or comical value at all. I was in awe, like I was psychic, a useless one apparently. I'm assuming he did not get the girl either. 3 years ago I was interning at a company that specialized in green energy and their mission was to provide electricity to remote villages in Africa. I get assigned to work with a team of engineers. On my way to meet up with them after arriving in Africa, I am asked to stop at said address and pick up an utility trailer that is waiting at a local store. I cannot reveal the name or location, but it's an old store, fairly large, with a second floor that was residential, where the man and his family lived. The shop had everything from product, food and medical supplies to a massive junkyard in the back full of automobiles and planes. When I arrive at the store, he is working on an outboard motor for a customer. He was very friendly and shook my hand as asked how he could help me. I said I am with X company and we have a utility trailer that I am supposed to pick up and take with me to X village. He asks for identification and I hand him my company ID and Tennessee driver's license, which in the little holder below the company ID. When he looks at my name, his face went from happy to confused. He said, I have a question. Do you have a father or sibling that you are named after, that also lives or did live in Tennessee? Okay, at this point every thought I had came to halt and I was dumbfounded. I am named after my dad and he lived in Tennessee all his life and there aren't too many people with our name either. After a long pause, I said, yes, I am named after my dad. How in the hell do you know that? He then said he met a man in the late 70s that stopped at his store. His name was Jeffrey so-and-so, also, and that I resembled him. I said, well, it couldn't be the same person. As far as I know, my father had never been to Africa. He said, no, it was your father. He was in the military and came here to get something from his store. He then goes on to tell me that my dad offered to help the man work on his car. After they fixed it, the man tried to give my dad some money, but he insisted that the man keep it. The man then asks my dad to join him and his family for dinner. It was the least he could do. They eat, and during the conversation the man's son overheard my dad talking about a guitar that he had with him. The little boy wanted to see the guitar and for my dad to play it, so my dad brings it inside and start to play. The boy was very fascinated with it and told his father he wanted to learn to play someday. Well, after dinner my dad has to leave. When he is about to walk out, he handed the boy the guitar and told him that he could have it if he promised to practice every day and one day he would try to return to hear him play it. I am overwhelmed at the emotions I am feeling is insane. The man invites me to dinner as he did my father. I accept and go upstairs where the man hands me a guitar case and said, this is the guitar. He said that guitar changed the course of his son's life. I said, where is your son now? He said that he moved out and went to college for music and now lives in another town and teaches guitar for a living, along with some other instruments. We start to eat and he asked me about my father, how he was these days. I then had to tell him that he passed away when I was still a child. We both started crying and he picked the guitar up and said, this is why you came here today. Nothing else explains such an phenomenon. Your father's spirit lives within this guitar. It was meant for you to show up here. We ate and when finished the man asks if I knew how to play. I said I know only one song in its entirety. He requested I play it before I leave. I start to play and his wife and him started crying. They said that it was the last song my dad played before giving the guitar to the man's son and leaving. Dedicated to my father, I only knew you for a short time, but to this day it amazes me at how many hearts you've touched, even long after you're gone. I love you and hope to see you someday. I went to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington when I was 12. When you first go in, they give you this passport thing which tells you the story of someone who lived during the Holocaust. The one that I got had a young man whose birthday was the same as mine, except 50 years prior. The day I went to the museum was 50 years to the day since his death. Last December, I had a bad dream early-ish in the morning that my dad had stopped taking his liver medication and that he was going to die. In the dream, I asked why he had been so careless, but he said that it was just his time. When I woke up, my sister texted me that Dad was in the hospital. He passed away 3 weeks later due to, of course, liver complications from not taking his medication. It was nearing Christmas, and one day when I came home from school, my mother asked me to guess who we got a Christmas card from. Without hesitation I said, from the people who ran the little motel on our summer trip to Michigan. She was speechless. I was right, and I was speechless too. On my 12th birthday I was on the way to the bike shop to get a new bike. I was with my dad, his girlfriend and my brother. We was still about 10 minutes away from the town center, so nowhere near the bike shop. Some random, old, creepy looking guy came up to us, looked down at me and said, "You buying a bike?" I looked at my dad, confused and kinda scared. We told him that we were on our way to buy a bike. He then started going on about how I must get a helmet and wear it all the time. We was a little freaked out, but we just assumed he was a weirdo and just forgot about it. A few hours later I was riding through the park on my new bike and I fell off. I didn't fall very hard and landed on grass, so it was cool. As I went to get up, brush myself off, I looked up and he was just standing there, looking disappointed and shaking his head. He shook his index finger at me and said, "I told you to wear a helmet." At this point I just shit myself and rode as fast as I could home. What is even weirder though is the fact that I have moved about 40 to 50 miles away since then and I still see him every once in a while. I don't believe in guardian angels, but it just creeps me out. Never ignore that sudden feeling that you need to get out of someplace. Never, ever. It saved my life. I was at a party that doubled as a sending off party for me before I deployed, and there was an after party planned in which I was going to DJ along with some of my other friends. I did a short set at the party, then dropped some ecstasy, yeah I know, I don't need a lecture, and ran around having fun with all my friends and my former production company. 2 hours later, I suddenly became absolutely dead sober and had that horrible feeling that we needed to leave and we needed to do it right that second. I immediately rounded up the friends I had come with, took everyone home and fell straight asleep. The next morning I was woken by a phone call. It was a friend telling me that at the after party, our friends had been murdered by a psycho going through the house with a shotgun. That's where I would have been if I hadn't gone home. My brother's name is Kelly. A few times, strangers have stopped near him and flatly say, "Kelly." Then keep walking. A waiter did it once. He stood right behind his chair with a full plate of dirty dishes, stopping to pronounce Kelly, then moving along. It happened a lot when we were on our way to work or school. Well, for me it would be when I moved from Massachusetts to where I am now. There were these two kids that lived in my now hometown, a brother and a sister. The brother and sister were the same ages as my brother and I, respectively. The boy and my brother's names both started with T, and the girl and my names both started with A. The boy was more of an athletic type, while the girl was more into art, also like my brother and I. I was a Girl Scout in my town in Massachusetts before, and I joined one of the troops when I got here, and it was the troop that the girl had been in. 3 days before we moved in, the two kids were hit by a drunk driver and killed. It was pretty damn eerie. When I was 17, I worked at Red Lobster. I closed the kitchen, so I was one of the last people to leave somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m. Being as late as it was, some of the city's bus routes were already done for the day and only the heavy traffic ones were still running. Due to this inconvenience, I had to take a bus that dropped me off several city blocks away from home, leaving me with a 20-minute walk home. This led me through a graveyard in the middle of a neighborhood, one of the oldest in the city. It had a small street that ran through it with streetlights, but both ends had a gate stopping vehicular traffic, only allowing pedestrians through, and headstones line either side instead of sidewalks. Creepy enough at night, but it was faster than walking around, especially since the cemetery was wide and narrow. At this particular point, I had been walking through here at least once a week coming home from work, so I grew fairly comfortable there and would even sometimes just check out headstones instead of walking straight home. This one night, however, things changed. I was walking up to the cemetery street, cutting through a grocery store parking lot, just wanting to get home to bed. As I walked up the side street leading to the pedestrian entrance, the streetlights in the cemetery shut off. All of them. At once. Weird, I thought, but I carried on. My bed was calling me. I walked through the gate and the first light turned on, basking me in its glow. I slowed, looked around and saw nothing unusual, so I continued. Coming to the edges of this lone lamp, the second light flickered on, stopping me in my tracks. I pull my already quietened headphones out of my ears, getting scared and searching for an answer. Still nothing. I pick up my pace, briskly walking through this second pool of light, noticing that the first pool has disappeared as I leave it behind. Getting up to the third light, it flashes to life while the second one dims out, much like my bravado by now. This continues on all the way through, the lights turning on and off as I enter and leave them, jogging out of fear. As I make my escape, the lights all off for now, I think about how creepy it would be if they all turned on now. But they didn't. At least, not until I was across the street from the graveyard, causing me to break into a run for the rest of the way home. I've told this to many friends, and always get the it was probably just motion sensors. It wasn't. I continued to use that path and had a couple of other less freaky experiences, but never again did I have the lights protect me in such a way.